Hello and welcome to the Circuit Breakers podcast series. I'm your host, Steve Semler, FocalPoint Business Coaching and LearningSim. And today I'm joined by Stephen Rothberg, who's the founder and chief visionary of College Recruiter, a job search site for early career candidates and the companies that employ them. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to kick us off with a brief background about who you
Sure,
are and what you
sure, no problem. So I think listeners should know that I'm Steven and you're Steve, at least for the next little bit. Yeah, so I grew up in Winnipeg, Canada. For those who struggle with their Canadian geography, it's basically if you took a map of Canada and folded it in half, east-west, it's like right in the middle. It's right above North Dakota, for those of us in the US. I moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I live. Way back in 88, I just graduated from college and moved here for grad school, and then have been here ever since. Married, 3 adult kids, a hyper bonded dog, and I am one of those people that the entrepreneurial bug bit me pretty early on. I think it's probably actually genetic.
need. So tell me about kind of the first experience and then how'd you get to College Recruiter along the way here?
Yeah, so the first experience of like coming to the US or
Oh,
or
the entrepreneurial
oh, the
side.
entrepreneurial bug. Yeah, so my paternal grandfather owned a little retail shop in a little tiny town of about 3,000 people, the kind of town that now there'd be like maybe one traffic light, a car dealer on one end of the town and a Dairy Queen on the other, like one of those little towns. Um, and so he owned that little retail shop when he was, I think, in his mid late 50s. A big chain came and bought him out. So he was fortunate enough to retire, I think, when he was like 55, 56. My dad was the equivalent of a CPA. And after I think he had been practicing for like 20 years or so, he decided to get out of accountancy and start his own small business, which was a real estate development business. He did some real estate work, commercial real estate in Winnipeg, some in Calgary, and mostly in Phoenix, which is where my parents ended up retire or living sort of the last part of their life and ended up retiring there. I That's why I kind of think it's genetic. It definitely there's a gene, some might call it a defect, that kind of rolls down through that side of the family. My first experience with entrepreneurship really was when I was in fifth grade. So what would that have made me? Maybe 10. And I had my mother go to a drugstore pharmacy and buy a box of these big jawbreakers that when you bought a whole box of them, they cost a nickel each. If you bought them individually, they were 25 cents each. And I would sell them to my classmates for 25 cents. So, I had a nice profit margin on that, and they weren't feeling ripped off either. They were happy to pay the same price as they would have in a store. I did caused my mother to have to come into class and meet with my fifth grade teacher because I was selling that candy while he was teaching. It wasn't just at school. He was trying to teach math while I was, running some little deals in the back of the classroom. So there's a time and place for everything.
Yeah. But you provided a convenience.
And probably some cavities. Yes.
Well, well, tell me about College Recruiter. How did that
Sure.
come to?
Yeah. So after I came to Minneapolis for grad school, graduated, it was law school. I was practicing in my first year, and a little bit similar to what happened with my father, who was also in a profession. He kind of got out, looking back on it, to enjoy his life. He was like fine with being an accountant. It was a good living. He wasn't going to get like super rich at it or anything like that, but that wasn't really, I think, his goal. Um, but I think there was just something missing. It was just sort of, he felt like this passion to do his own thing rather than being part of a big thing. And I had that same bug, that same desire. And so when I was practicing in my first year, I started up the business that ended up morphing into College Recruiter. So it was the fall of 91. It was basically pre-internet. And I went to the University of Minnesota, my school I had recently graduated from, and made a deal with a bunch of different offices where I would publish the campus map for them, give them the maps for free, and they would be way better than the crappy maps that they were handing out at that time. And I made my money by selling the advertising around the borders.
Mm,
I ended up doing that for another couple of schools and also an area of the Twin Cities, the St. Paul, Minnesota. That was all great, but highly seasonal. Almost all of my work was during the summer. It was like this incredibly intensive 8-week process to do the sales, get the artwork in, get the printing, get them distributed. And then the rest of the year, I could have like sat there and twiddled my thumbs and it wouldn't have made a difference financially. Now, kind of looking back on it, maybe that was the life. But at the time, I was newly married. My wife and I had our first kid, and we were looking at like, how do we take the business from where it was at that point and add on? Do we add on more maps? Well, that's just going to make that whole seasonality problem worse. Do we do something completely different? And when we sat down and wrote a business plan, she had been a consultant with KPMG, so it was right up her alley. We sat down and wrote this business plan, and what really came out of that more than anything else was that we realized that the strength, what set our business apart from others, was that there were very few businesses that were producing publications targeted at the students, where the people who were running those businesses weren't students. Like there were a lot of students who would do something for 3 months, some of them well, some of them not well, but there was no continuity. Your local Burger King, your local apartment, company, whatever, they'd have to deal with a different vendor every single year. And it was risky. And some of those vendors took their money and never delivered. And some of them delivered exceptionally good value, but then they were gone again. So we kind of had this track record. It was only 3-4 years long, but I was getting to the point where I would call my customers and like 85% of them were renewing for the year on the very first phone call. Call them up.
mm,
It's like, hey, Joyce, it's Steven. We do this map. It's like, oh, great. You're doing it again. We want to do this. Is the price the same? Yeah, price is the same. Or maybe it was 10% higher, whatever. Great. We want to run the same ad again, except instead of saying blank, change that word to this. And that was it. So it became really, really fast. What we ended up realizing through writing that business plan was that the campus maps did a really good job of reaching the freshmen, the incoming students.
yeah.
We didn't want to create a publication that cannibalized that. So what other demographic at that school would make sense? Well, one of them are the graduating seniors. Graduating seniors don't need campus maps. They've been on campus for years, but what they do need are jobs. So we created an employment magazine that became called College Recruiter. This is 1994. And a couple of years later, this thing called the internet came along. And we created the first version of our website. We paid a high school kid and his dad a few $1,000s to build it. And the idea was it was going to be the sizzle that would help sell the steak. We could call up the apartment company and say, hey, if you run an ad in the magazine, you also get it for free on the website. Well, what's a website? So we'd have to explain that to them. And they'd be like, oh, well, all of our woes, reaching new customers, hiring people, whatever, that's all going to be in the past because we're on this thing called the internet. It was the silver bullet. There never is a silver bullet, unless I guess you watch like old cowboy shows. But the magazine first one came out in 94. Website went live in 96. Within about 2 years, we could see that the future of the business was online because you could call me up today and we could have your ad running today and we could take it down 17 days from now or whatever, whenever you had hired the people you needed to hire. And you can't do that on print. So by 2000, the business was completely online. It was just the employment website. Today, We help more than 12 million students and recent grads with 0 to 5 years of experience. We're global. We're dealing in half a dozen currencies worldwide. It's mostly cost per click or cost per application. It is an amazingly complex business for being a small business.
Yeah. Well, how did you make the transition from out of the print? I'm assuming you don't do that
Right.
print anymore.
Yeah. So the print was hard to leave behind. And I suspect that you've had lots of clients like this that have, there's something that they're doing. It's like it gives them golden handcuffs. Like they're making enough money, they're enjoying it enough, they're providing enough value, whatever. Something is good enough that it's really hard to leave behind. But what happened, where the conclusion that we reached in 1999 was that the longer that we continued with the print, the maps, the employment magazines, the longer it would be before we could really grow that business, to really increase the revenue. And we also could see that over time, the print business was going to slowly go away, which is absolutely what's happened. I mean, in sort of the mid 2000s, 2005, 2006, 2007 is when you really started to see newspapers fall off. You
Mm-hmm.
don't know too many people anymore who subscribe to Time magazine. Sports Illustrated, I think I heard is just online, or maybe it's just like 95% of their subscribers or whatever. So, print is still there and it still has its purpose. But to base an entire employment business around a print publication, especially when you're reaching young adults,
Yeah.
not the wisest thing in the world. So it took us about a year and we made that transition. It was more difficult than we expected and more worthwhile than we expected. One of the hardest things was actually our employees, because we
Mm.
discovered that the people that we had who were really good people, really good at their jobs, most of them, probably 3/4 of them, did not have the skill set for digital media. Their skill set was more in line with print. And so what we ended up doing is, at sort of towards the end, is we gave everybody a month's notice and said to them, to the people that we were going to need to let go, gave them all a month's notice and said, with pay, feel free to like use the company equipment. You want to do a phone interview from your desk, no worries, go for it. You need time off to go and interview, no worries, it's with pay. Um, every single one of them within a couple of weeks not only found new jobs, but they found better jobs, which thankfully it turned out that way. So, kind of in hindsight, they ended up better off. It would have been really unfortunate if it hadn't been the case.
Yeah. And I think there's a key piece there from what you said. It took you took you a year to make
Yeah.
that decision, that transition. Um, People often think it's kind of like, okay, I get to a decision point and then we go and do.
And that's me.
And I think
That's totally me. If it takes me 5 minutes to think of something, it shouldn't take me more than 5 minutes to implement it. And every time I think that, I'm wrong.
yeah. I just from a kind of I mean, where I'm coming from on the coaching and the leadership side of things, it's kind of the human change psychology,
Hmm.
psychology. Um, People need some time to get used to it, and then there's the implementation planning. Um, we can get some great ideas. We can recognize, and it was really fortunate that you were like paying attention to the business and the numbers and recognizing, ooh, we got a divergence here. There's something that's, in the business speak, it's a disruptive innovation. You're starting to take advantage of it and you're ready to, cut loose the golden handcuffs.
Yeah, that's interesting, Steve. I haven't thought of it that way, but I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. And I think it also is really consistent with how my role evolved, I don't know, 15, 16, 17 years later. So about something like 6, 7, 8 years ago, my job title changed from being president, which kind of implies that I'm very involved in the day-to-day activity. You know, you're probably the number one person in your organization for operational stuff. And that
Mm,
can cross over, you know, tech, finance, marketing, all sorts of different areas. In a small business, president can literally mean that you are the employee. And early on, that was the case. But, you know, I had a dozen people who either reported directly to me or they had one person in between me and them. 6, 7, 8 years ago, when we started to have a little bit of a larger company, started to have management that we had hired that weren't owners,
mhm.
I had the ability to kind of say, okay, am I good at this? Do I like this? And the answer was no and no. I'm not a good manager of people, and I really dislike it. I think people assume that if you own a business, that you must be a good manager. And I
Oh,
think those are very different skill sets. And
yes,
I
they
think a
are.
lot of people who own businesses are forced to manage, and people are forced to be managed by those people. And it can make a lot of people really miserable. I think that's one reason a lot of businesses have such high turnover is that their owners are just terrible managers. So I had the ability to step out of that. So president job title went away. And what replaced it was chief visionary officer. So one of the things I've learned as I've gotten older is that I'm better than the average person at kind of like having my eyes up, looking at trends, what's happening in other industries, and saying, does that impact our industry? Might it impact our industry 2 years from now, 5 years from now? And especially in the digital advertising world, I can look over and see what consumer marketers are doing, people who sell products and services, and how are they selling? You know, if you look at Shopify or Amazon or, you know, any of the big retailers, what are they doing that's working and not working? Human resources always lags other business areas. And so to me, it's not rocket science. If I see something impacting, you know, online marketing of consumer goods today, I know that a couple of years from now, maybe 5 years from now, that's going to be coming to online talent acquisition space. And I can try to get our business ready for that. So we've generally been a little ahead of the curve because of that. Also, we're not afraid of change. We embrace it.
Yeah, yeah. And this being 2024 at time of recording, this is like the 30th anniversary year.
Yeah, 30. Well, of the founding of the business, it was
Public.
1991. So 33. More than enough time to know better. Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of along those challenges, one of the things that I do is specifically work with leaders
Mhm.
and business owners around that piece of um, I love, well, like with on the tech business side, I got into the business because I love technology. I love helping my clients with their technology problems. I'm solution oriented. I'm customer oriented, and oh my goodness, the business stuff and the people stuff.
Yeah.
So I help them with that, and that can be really useful to kind of come to some of the conclusions and that you've done as well. What
Cool.
so when you think about kind of staying up to date, what are the kind of the top innovations at this point, or whether it's tools or concepts or things that you're paying most attention to?
Yeah. So in our space, the job board space, so the biggest organizations or the biggest companies in our industry would be sites like Indeed, LinkedIn. Um, they tend to be global,
Mm,
that it's kind of hard to find an industrialized country that Indeed does not have a pretty good presence in. And one of the things that Indeed and some of its direct competitors have done really well over the years is the same things that we're working on at a smaller scale. And we're a niche site. We target a particular niche, not all job seekers, but just early careers. So I can look at the stuff that Indeed is doing good, bad, occasionally ugly, but rarely, and sort of learn from what they're doing. So Indeed, for example, did not create pay-per-click advertising. Pay-per-click job advertising would be employer posts an ad, and when the candidate sees the ad and clicks the apply button to go to the employer's site to apply, that click, the employer pays for it. Might be 25 cents, 50 cents, a dollar, just kind of depends upon on the job, the hiring need of the employer. Indeed really popularized that. And we've been doing that since 2014. We were very, very early. But in terms of like, what are we working on? What's coming? It's that same business model, that same product in areas of the world where pay-per-click advertising is almost unheard of. So we started to, we expanded outside of the US a couple of years ago. And at the time, about 35% of our business was pay-per-click. Now it's about 98% in the US. There's like, I think one, maybe two customers that's out of thousands that still post the traditional way, $300 for 30 days or whatever. But in the UK and Canada, pay-per-click is known, and the more sophisticated employers are doing some of their advertising that way. But the vast majority of employers that are advertising jobs online don't know anything about it. You go to the EU, it's even less. And it's almost unheard of. Africa, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, etc. So what we're trying to do is sort of build some of that market. We're doing a little bit of education in that market, and we're also looking for the early adopters. It can become this very maybe symbiotic relationship that some of those bigger employers or organizations doing a lot of that advertising are frustrated because they want to do it on a pay-per-click basis, but they don't have the vendors offering it. On the flip side, we want some of those advertisers, but they're hard to find. So I suppose it's a little bit like dating, when you meet that perfect person, everything is glorious, but it can be hard to find them.
Yeah, it's almost, I mean, it's not exactly a joint venture, but it is that mutual benefit partnership.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it can be tough.
yeah. You really have to try to create that win-win. With your customers, with your vendors, with your partners. It's the world is a lot smaller than I think most of us appreciate, and burning bridges always comes back to hurt you.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. Well, thinking about burning bridges for a moment, if you could wave a magic wand and make any one part of your business kind of like realistically better, what
Yeah.
would that? What's the thing to improve at this point?
Oh, yeah, sure. That's actually it's an easy one because it's one that we've struggled with for a long time. Outbound sales. So what we're really good at are inbound sales. We're good at content. Um, Most of our customers are employers that pay to advertise. They'll look at our podcasts, they'll come and read our blog articles, some other kind of thought leadership piece. And we have like short little forms, fill this in and we'll get back to you, for more information. We also have some of these online calculators. If you want to estimate what it's going to cost you to hire these sorts of people, fill in this information, give us your email, and we'll send that to you. We're really good at converting those sorts of leads into paying customers. What we're really bad at is basically dialing for dollars and, calling you up and it's like, hey, Steve, I see that you're the senior vice president of talent acquisition for some Fortune 500 company. You should use us because we're the best thing since sliced bread. We're really bad at that. And so that would be a magic wand, a
Yeah.
magic wand moment.
Well, neat. And that's not uncommon. And since you've got the good inbound to
Mhm.
build on, probably got positioning, ready to go for it too.
Yeah. And one of the struggles that we have with the outbound, like why do we struggle with one, not the other? Well, there are going to be a number of reasons, but one of the weird things in our space, in this early career space, is that most college students and recent grads work for go to work for Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 companies. And most of those exclusively work with a company called Handshake, or they work with LinkedIn or Indeed. So it's like they go to the really big player in the
Mm,
industry. And so it's hard for a smaller company to kind of break through with that.
yeah.
But if one of those same contacts, points of contact comes to our site, now we know, right, who's actually really interested. They're interested in us right now. But, if we start cold calling 1,000 people, we might call somebody who 3 days ago might have been interested, or 3 days from now. So the timing becomes harder.
Hmm.
But the inbound leads, it's like it's the right customer at the right time in the right place. And so, we're gonna jump on that. We definitely don't close all those. That's for sure. But I think we close more than our fair share.
Well, cool. Well, what are some things that you would offer as tips and advice for entrepreneurs who are either just getting started or are facing some challenges in there with their businesses?
Yeah, friends of mine or people that I know that have been starting their business. In fact, I gave this piece of advice to somebody yesterday, is only spend money on the stuff that you have to. So when I see a new business started, bootstrapped or venture funded, and they have a swanky office with a beautiful conference room and great chairs, I can kind of look at my watch and figure out how long they're going to be in business for. They're going to blow through that cash, because I'm sorry, but that beautiful $80,000 table in your conference room is not going to add to your bottom line. It might make you feel important, but that's a personal thing. That's not a business thing. So just watch your dimes, in especially in this kind of market. Um, the other lesson that I try to pass on, and given my age, it's mostly younger people at this point. They say with age comes wisdom. I've got the age. We'll see if I've got the wisdom. But the other piece of advice is I shamelessly rip it off from Guy Kawasaki, the Apple evangelist, tech entrepreneur. And I heard him speak once, and it was like, this is so simple and so brilliant. And basically, the advice is, if your customers have figured out a better way to use your product than you have, your customers are right. And so he gave this example of, he had invested in a company, and I think they made knives. It might have been like hunting knives or something like that. And the founders of the company found out that some of their customers were using these knives in ways that the company didn't anticipate. Nothing illegal, nothing immoral, but like using it as like a screwdriver. If you're out in the woods and something breaks, then it's like it almost becomes like a Swiss Army knife. And they really didn't like it. And so they started to like look at changing the way the product was built so it could only be used in the way that they thought it should be used. And Guy Kawasaki's like, are you crazy? Like, what's wrong with them using your knife as a screwdriver? Like, it's not illegal, it's not immoral. And by the way, it's adding to your sales and profitability. So double down. Don't get rid of that feature, embrace that feature. So they changed, if I remember correctly, they changed the packaging to better reflect that, yes, this is a great knife, but you can also use it as a screwdriver. Uh, and that's something that we try to really remember, that a lot of times our customers know better than we do how to use our products, right? They know, for us, they know their hiring needs better than we ever will. And if they've figured out a better way to use our product, I want to hear it, because then I want to share that with other customers.
Yeah. So we can go along with that and not have to be kind of like the smartest person in the room. We can take advantage of the innovations from wherever they're coming from, and especially if essentially the customer is kind of like already buying it
Yeah.
to a
Yeah.
certain.
And there are some advantages of being the dumbest person in the room. There's only one way to go, and that's up.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't seem like you've had too many dumbest person in the room moments from what you've described. Yeah, I'm sure lots of
That's
learning points, but
yeah.
it's,
We if we get together again and do like a blooper podcast, then I could provide you with some examples.
okay. Well, we'll think about that one too and see what we. Yeah. But honestly, really, thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate your time, and it's great to hear about that journey and some of the insights and tips and stuff you've had.
Cool.
So
Well,
appreciate it.
thank you. This was a real pleasure, and hopefully it helps.
Yeah, thanks. And for the folks who are watching, when you're faced with challenges in your own business, consider these tips, consider what Stephen's offered here. Then feel free to reach out to me for coaching and training support. As always, I'm Steve Semler, Focal Point Business Coaching and Learning Sim, helping techies and other entrepreneurs be great leaders. Look forward to seeing you in our next episode.